Hey folks, this is the Love of Cinema podcast. We like to talk movies. If you like to talk movies too, you come to the right place.
I think Tridev somewhere also puts a lot of stress on music. It brings in a new kind of sound,
Right.
which the post video era and the post, world this week era on TV, you were a little familiar, or when Grammys were being telecast live on Doordarshan, you were starting to get familiar with the kind of sound which was, prevalent in the West. And I think Vijusha, even though a couple of songs in the film, we'll come to that later, are straight lifts of very popular uh, quintessential 80s numbers of of the era. But still, one must give the credit to Vijusha bringing in a new kind of sound, especially if you look at the background score in Hindi films. I think
Yes.
that also plays a very big role in keeping the memories of Tridev alive.
Welcome back, folks. This is Himanshu, and welcome to episode 10 of Love of Cinema podcast. You know those films which you loved as a kid, but kind of let go as you grow older? Your taste and sensibilities evolve with age and exposure to different kinds of cinema. And some films simply don't resonate with you the way they did back then. But then, there are some films which you watched when you were a kid, loved them, and still, to this day, are fond of. Moments from these films get burned into your memory, so to speak. Personally, Tridev's one of those films. It's a special film with a special space in the nostalgic corner of our hearts for all of us who grew up in the 90s and late 80s. It's over the top, but deliciously so. It's loud, but non annoyingly so. And of course, some of it is dated, but charmingly so. There's also Sonam, not to be confused with Sonam Kapoor. As far as I can remember, I believe Sonam was my earliest celebrity crush. There's also Jackie Shroff, sporting leather jackets and a wrapped dupatta around his neck, which undoubtedly sparked a fashion trend, and which, I suspect, has a present day connection to Lullen Top, but more on that later. Then there is the soundtrack, which is perhaps one of the most iconic film soundtracks from the 80s. I like all songs from its soundtrack, but there's one song which I'm crazy about. Gali Gali Mein is a song I love quite a bit, to put it mildly. I can do an entire episode just talking about that song, but that would be perhaps too much, at least for most. On the other hand, an entire episode on Tridev sounds like fun, especially since it turns 30 next week. I wanted to invite someone on this episode who not only loves the film, but can also help us dive deep into the film, and also someone who can share with us insights on that particular era from Hindi cinema, the late 80s. Eminent film historian Gautam Chintamani was kind enough to join us on this episode to talk about Tridev. In case you aren't familiar with Gautam, Gautam is also a film columnist and has authored widely popular books on Rajesh Khanna and Kayamat Se Kayamat Tak. Just a quick customary note before we move on to my chat with Gautam. If you're listening to this podcast for the first time, do check out our past episodes. If you enjoy similar conversations centered around films and streaming shows, do consider subscribing to our podcast. You can find our podcast on all major podcasting apps. Also, do drop us a comment. We would love to hear what you thought about the episode and anything else you would like to add to the conversation held on the episode. Having said that, let's talk Tridev. Tridev came out in 1989, which was a great year for Hindi cinema. Chandni, Maine Pyar Kiya, Ram Lakhan, Chalbaz, Batwara were some of the other hits from that year. 1989 was also a good year for relatively offbeat films like Pooja Bhatt's debut, Daddy. There was also Bachchan's Main Azad Hu, adaptation of Kapra's Meet John Doe, and another favorite movie of mine. But Gautam, if you could take us back in time, so to speak, and kind of set up this time, the late 80s in Hindi cinema for us. And then we will segue to Tridev from there.
80s, Himanshu, have, unfortunately been derided as one of the worst decades for Hindi cinema. And when I say Hindi cinema, I largely mean popular or commercial Hindi cinema, which by the mid 90s would get recognized as Bollywood. But back in the 80s, um, there were all sorts of things happening at that time. And I think the video onslaught, the onslaught of VHS, had really pushed filmmakers to the brink. But why I like the 1980s is that for an initial period, at least between the first half of the decade, between 1980 and 85, 86, perhaps for the first time in the history of Indian cinema, you had five different generations of filmmakers working at the same time, and each of them had their own markets, each of them had their own dedicated audiences, each of them delivered hits. So if you look at the generation of filmmakers who were working at that time, you had a Raj Kapoor who started making films in the late 1940s. You had
Sure.
Chetan Anand who was making films in the mid 40s, and then of course by the early 50s, there was B.R. Chopra who was making films at that time. There was Nasir Hussain Sahab who was making films. There was Atma Ram, who's Guru Dutt's brother. Vijay Anand was making films at that time. Shakti Samant was making films at that time. You even had the next generation of filmmakers in the form of Bridge, Manmohan Desai, Prakash Mehra, Rakesh Kumar, all these big guys from the 70s who were making films at that time. You also had what back then you would have referred to as the Young Turks. So you had a Subhash Ghai, you had a Rahul Ravel, you had JP Datta making films at that time. And you also had the crop of these younger filmmakers coming up. So you had Suraj Barjatia, you had Mansoor Khan, you had Vinod Chopra, who was making his bones, like they would say. You also had the entire parallel cinema movement really coming into its own in the early 1980s. So of course you had Money Call and Mrinal Sen's films in the late 60s, which started the parallel cinema movement in India, or the New Wave, as it was known back then. Of course, in the mid 70s, you had Shyam Benegal's films, but it was actually in the early 80s and towards the mid 80s where you had Govind Nihalani and, of course, Shyam Benegal, you had Sai Paranjpe, you had Kundan Shah making films at that time. I think it was a fantastic time for Indian films. And more importantly, it was a phase where we did not have something known as, the Critics Award at various film awards. So you had parallel cinema heroes or leading men and women like Shabana Azmi, Smita Patil, Nasiruddin Shah, Om Puri, Pankaj Kapoor, all these guys competing with the likes of the Bachchans, the Mithun Chakravartis, the Jitendras, the Rajesh Khannas, the Vinod Khannas, and Shatrughan Sinha of that time. So the two or three big Filmfare Best Actor awards that people like Nasiruddin Shah and Om Puri got towards in the first part of the 80s, they pipped the likes of Bachchan to the post. So it was a time where uh, the parallel cinema stars were becoming almost as big and recognizable as the regular film stars of the period. And it was also a time where popular Hindi films were getting influenced by a sense of realism from the parallel films coming in. So you had this gritty narrative, which you see in films that Javed Akhtar wrote after he parted ways with Salim Khan. And even Salim Khan, independently when he wrote films like Naam or Javed wrote Mashal, Meri Jang, you had a sense of, popular films, but with the idea, with the kind of realism which was not seen or which they were not used to. So you would have films like Arjun, which again was written by Javed Akhtar, or you would have a film like Dakat or JP Datta's Gulami, where issues such as the caste system and the evils of caste system, or the class disparity seen in society, depicted in a way which was not traditional Hindi film style. It was not like um, Garibo ki Awaaz Suno, or it was not like the kind of social depiction that a B.R. Chopra film would have. It was as real as the realm of commercial Hindi film, the escapist commercial Hindi films would allow you. I think a lot of interesting stuff was happening at that time, where popular actors like Rajesh Khanna would do a film like Red Rose, which is a remake of um, a Tamil film that featured Kamal Hassan.
Yes, yes.
So you had a leading man, one of the biggest stars of the time, playing an unapologetic, psychopath, and the script does not justify the reason that he went through certain evils or a bad time in life, which forced him to become a criminal or what have you. So it was a very interesting period. I think somewhere younger filmmakers like J.P. Datta, Rahul Ravel were trying to come to a point where you could still make your regular commercial films, but not be too dependent on the classic tropes, a parallel comedy track which did not make any sense at all, or, a dime a dozen songs so that you allowed people to go out for toilet breaks or cigarette breaks. I mean, I think of two or three films from this period, like a film like Arjun, which had a popular song, Mamaya Kero Mama, composed by R.D. Burman.
Right.
Or if you look at a film like Meri Jang, which had Lakshmikant Pyarelal and Kishore Kumar and S. Janki's duet, Bol Baby Bol Rock and Roll, or the fantastic title track that Shabir Kumar and Lataji sang, Zindagi Har Kadam Ek Nayi Jang Hai. But even if you were to take out these songs from the film, nothing happens to the narrative. The narrative still remains as intact. I feel perhaps there was a situation which was coming where you would not have been dependent on very long screen time. I mean, you would not be looking at films which are 2.5 to 3 hours long. You would also be looking at films which would have used or which could have perhaps used soundtrack kind of songs, as we saw in Hollywood. But I think the failure of Dakat, which brought together the successful team of Sunny Deol in front of the camera, Javed Akhtar writing the script, R.D. Burman composing the music, and Rahul Ravel directing the film. I think somewhere the failure of Dakat pushed popular filmmakers back to a space where they did not want to take risks beyond a point. And I think the biggest visual evidence of this can be seen in Subhash Ghai's films. If you see, Meri Jung is followed by Karma. Karma is gritty. It has songs, but it still is a very very you know darkish revenge drama as compared to the regular Hindi films. Of course, there was also Umesh Mehra's Ashanti, which had a similar kind of a track where Rajesh Khanna meets with an accident and he, you know, chooses these three women, Shabana Azmi, Parveen Babi, and I think Padmini Kolhapuri, if I'm not mistaken, it was like a rehash of Charlie's Angels, which I think was perhaps somewhere an inspiration for Karma. But having said that, you see the failure of Dakat pushed Subhash Ghai back into a very comfortable, popular Hindi film setup, like Ram Lakhan, where a certain level of grittiness was traded for commercially safe ideas. So I feel that 80s is a period which often gets the short end of the stick. But I think as we rediscover many of those films, you realize that there was a lot happening there where uh, filmmakers were actually trying to push the envelope.
That's those are all great points, Gautam. Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think 80s, like you said, often gets a bad rap, but if you look closely, they were experimenting in a sense, and now if you look back, probably it all looks formulaic. But for that time, I mean, I certainly think they were trying out different things. And another thing about 80s was the string of successful multi-starrers, right?
Mhm.
Like probably Tridev was the last successful multi-star of the 1980s because once the 90s ushered in, it saw the end of the multi-stars and probably the trend shifted more towards romantic dramas, if you will. Uh, uh,
True. I think multi-starring films with more than a couple of heroes probably started with, I think, B.R. Chopra's Waqt, which had three very popular, stars of the period and three very popular leading ladies, and it had a
Absolutely.
lot of, it had a lot of, it probably set up a pattern that was followed, and of course, 70s is known for multi-starrers, like you were saying. But what separates the 80s in terms of, films with a couple of leading men and leading ladies is that a lot of actors who tried to circumvent the whole multi-starrer thing in the 80s were forced to become a part of the setup. See, if you look at the 1970s, there are only two or three big films which has more than two leading men. So let's not look at the two hero project like they would say. Let's not look at an array of films that Amitabh Bachchan and Vinod Khanna did in that period. But you
Sure.
had Amar Akbar Anthony, you had I think you had Kabhi Kabhi. So these were two or three films which had a couple of heroes, more than a couple of heroes, but stars like Dharmendra and Rajesh Khanna, very consciously avoided being a part of such setups. But by the 80s, and I think right at the onset of the 80s, you have Rajput, which had Vinod Khanna, Dharamji, and Rajesh Khanna. Then you had Shan, which is also 1980. So you had Shatrughan Sinha, Amitabh Bachchan, Shashi Kapoor, Sunil Dutt in an extended cameo. And Dharmender and Rajesh Khanna, two big stars, become almost like a constant staple in most of these films. I think Tridev somewhere gets all these, um, all these elements, and it's a nice, it's a nice final goodbye to the to the setup. Of course, in the 90s also you have a lot of multi-starers because you had Mohra, which again is Rajiv Rai's film, and I
Oh,
think
yes,
that
yes.
perhaps would be the last of the big super hit multi-starers. But I think in many ways, Tridev is like I feel that Ram Lakhan is the perfect goodbye to the two brother template. It kind of relives Diwar and it relives Ganga Jamna and it also relives Naya Daur to some extent. Two friends at least who were close as brothers in Naya Daur. But I think these two films, especially Tridev, was the final goodbye for the multi-starrer, and also, the element of the larger than life villain. Amrish Puri as Bhujang in the film is perhaps, the 80s interestingly start with Shakal, who's almost like a similar villain, and ends with Bhujang, who's the last of these big guys. I think there was another multi-starrer in between Mohra and Tridev, which is Anil Sharma's Tehelka,
Oh,
which
yes. That's a
yeah,
lovely
the
film.
remake of
Yes.
Where Eagles Dare. It had Nasiruddin Shah, it had Javed Jafri, it had Aditya Pancholi, it had Dharamji in it, and it had Pallavi Joshi, it had Shikha Swaroop, and a couple of other people. And even again, it was a film where Amrish Puri was the villain, and I think he was called Dong in the film, and
Yes, yes.
his lair
Shom,
is called
Shom.
Leela. Yeah, Dong kabhi wrong nahi hota. So for me, Tridev in that sense, has a lot of classical Hindi film multi-starrer elements, and it's a final goodbye. That's why I think perhaps it's enshrined in our minds also.
Right, right. That's what makes it special.
Yes, and also somewhere it it's one of those rare multi-starrer films where music also blends in very well. Of course, when you look at films like Amar Akbar Anthony or Shan, the music is up there. But between Shan and Tridev, you had a whole barrage of these four hero films like Jeete Hain Shan Se, Mardo Wali Baat, Loha, Sultanat. Uh, I think a couple of Chunky Pandey films also, Aag Hi Aag. There was a film called Shehzade, which had a double role of Dharamji with Shatrughan Sinha and Chunky Pandey in that. But all these films came at a period where the music in Hindi cinema had perhaps taken a backseat. Of course, music and melody gets revived with Mansoor Khan's Qayamat Se Qayamat Tak, which is composed by Anand and Milan. But between Shan and Tridev, most of these three hero films or these Daku films or these vendetta films never really put that kind of emphasis on music. I think Tridev somewhere also puts a lot of stress on music. It brings in a new kind of sound,
Right.
which the post video era and the post, world this week era on TV, you were a little familiar, or when Grammys were being telecast live on Doordarshan, you were starting to get familiar with the kind of sound which was, prevalent in the West. And I think Vijusha, even though a couple of songs in the film, we'll come to that later, are straight lifts of very popular uh, quintessential 80s numbers of of the era. But still, one must give the credit to Vijusha bringing in a new kind of sound, especially if you look at the background score in Hindi films. I think
Yes.
that also plays a very big role in keeping the memories of Tridev alive.
Yes, yes. And like you said, definitely we're going to spend considerable amount of time on the music later on. But let's talk about the cast a little bit, Gautam. As impressive as the lead cast is, but how about the supporting cast? I mean, that reads like who's who from the world of 80s. I mean, right from Raza Murad to Rajesh Vivek, from Shekhar Suman to Vijayendra Ghadge and Yunus Pervez, Dalip Tahil, and one of my favorite duos from 80s and 90s, Tej Sapru and Dan Dhanoa.
Yeah,
Uh, till this day, the only Hindi film celebrity whose autograph I have happens to be Tej Sapru. I kid you not.
wow.
That's the only person whose autograph I have. And what an interesting duo these two made. I almost saw them as heir apparent to other famous duo from the 70s, Sudhir and Ranjit. I'm thinking
Yeah,
like Dharmatma, films like that.
true, true. I think Hindi films are perhaps perhaps the only cinema in the world and popular Hindi films where actors with a single line or even one bit walk on parts um, kind of write their way into history. It's been a common phenomenon where people with one line or just one dialogue end up becoming very big. And you rightly said, I mean, I think somewhere the onset of a certain kind of finesse which came into Hindi films with Mansoor Khan's Qayamat se Qayamat Tak, in terms of treatment and in terms of the look and feel. And I think later, so Qayamat se Qayamat Tak is 88, and I think by 95, where the finesse somewhere became a stand-in for class. So a certain group of actors, unfortunately, they ended up losing out on a large number of roles because the kind of look and feel, the visual treatment of films had changed. The example that one can give is that, look at it this way. Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge had Amrish Puri as the villain, so to speak, for the want of any other word. And the next film that Adi Chopra makes, he replaces Amrish Puri with Amitabh Bachchan.
Yes.
So because Amit ji graduates to the strong supporting character roles, an entire generation of actors just end up losing out on work. Similarly, when leading men started doing comedy, of course, Mr. Bachchan at the onset of the 80s, and then later Salman and Amir Khan or Akshay Kumar getting very good at comedy. So an entire generation of comedians didn't have any work. So I think in that aspect, Tridev somewhere brings together all these fantastic characters. These actors that you would recognize anywhere, but unfortunately, their name might escape you. So of course Dan Dhanova is there. I remember seeing Dan Dhanova for the first time in Subhash Ghai's Karma, where he had a very very strong role as a Sikh gentleman who ends up killing somebody in order to save Sri Devi, who's on the run from Dr. Dang in the end.
Yes.
That character lived in my mind, and of course he was there in Mard as well, where he plays the main villain, the arch rival to Raju Tangewala, played by Amitabh Bachchan. But in Tridev, we have again you have a generation of these supporting actors. I mean, if you look at it, if you start from Subiraj, who plays Jat Saxena, who's Sunny Deol's father in the film, you have Anjana Mumtaz, who's playing the commissioner Anupam Kher's wife. You have now Satyajit, then Master Satyajit, who plays I think Inspector Karan's friend in that film. Then of course you have Shekhar Suman, you have Vijendra Ghatke, you have Ajit Vachhani, you have Dalip Tahil, and then like Raza Murad, you said. So all these guys, it's in my to my mind, now that we're talking Himanshu, I think Tridev could very well be one of the greatest odes to 80s Hindi films. So
Yeah,
it,
I think
these
so. Yeah.
guys make it fun to go back, and see visit these things again and again.
Absolutely, yeah. And like so many films from that time, Tridev has a handful of extraordinary set pieces and sequences, which are just quite memorable. There are sequences set at Amrish Puri's den, if I may call it that. There is a
Mhm.
fabulous set for the song Gali Gali Mein, which we'll come to shortly. But a couple of
Yeah,
my favorite sequences are the prison escape by Rajesh Vivek and that iconic Sunny Deol scene where he rises from the debris. Let's talk about the first one, Gautam. Let's talk about Rajesh Vivek's prison escape. And of course, fans of the movie will know what I'm talking about. But just in case for folks from younger generation, if you haven't seen the film, Rajesh Vivek plays Amrish Puri's brother, who happens to be in prison. And let me try to describe to you the prison escape that transpires where Rajesh Vivek escapes from the prison. So you know how you set up an Uber pickup, right?
yeah.
So once the driver arrives at your location, he'll call you, right? Like I'll say, "Hey Gautam, this is Himanshu. This is your Uber pickup. Please come out or come down. I'm here." And something similar happens in Tridev, where Jackie Shroff flies into the prison quad in a chopper and literally announces over the speaker that he's there to get Raghav, happens to be Rajesh Vivek's character. And literally, again, like an Uber pickup, Raghav comes running out. Once Jackie Shroff says, Raghav, hum tumhe lene aaye hain. And Raghav comes running out and hops inside his Uber ride. And isn't there any security at the prison, you ask? Sure, there are a few guards, but of course, all of them have by now fallen to Jackie Shroff's rather nonchalant pistol shots. And it's an absolutely outrageous sequence, but deliciously outrageous one. And I absolutely love it. And it's so indicative of some of these sequences when taken out of context, they seem over the top and outrageous. But while you're watching the movie, you absolutely love it. And then there's the other favorite, which is an iconic scene from Three Days, where the bad guys try to burn down Sunny Deol's house, obviously to kill him. And somehow Sunny Deol not only survives, but is virtually unscathed and rises from the debris to mouth some of the most iconic lines from the film. Gautam, do you want to talk about that scene?
Yeah, so let's start with the fantastic prison escape. I think when you're looking at Hindi films and you look at set pieces, I think I feel somewhere that Tridev's bodacious action set piece owes its I think owes some part of its genesis to what Ramesh Sippy was trying to achieve with Shan. See, when you were making a follow up to Sholay, you really don't know how to top it off, So you need to go all out. You need to think larger than life and really, you know, think the impossible and probably just reduce a few notches and then try and hope
Mm,
as hell the audience would buy that argument. I think when you're looking at a film like Tridev, when you're trying to tell people the I mean, it's like the introduction that Mogambo has in Mr. India, where you really don't know what you're going to see, when you're following Ajit Vachhani and Sharat Saksena's character, and when you see this guy, or when the four baddies go to meet Shakal in Shan for the first time, you really don't know what you're looking at. Now, here, you know who Bhujang is, but you don't attribute or don't attach that kind of uh, you know importance or that fear that you had of Shakal or Mogambo or Gabbar Singh to Bhujang, because Bhujang looks very normal. So how do you build up Bhujang's fear in the minds of audience? You build up by showing how people who want Bhujang to do something for you would go out of their way to please him. So the reason that Ravi's character goes, Ravi Mathur, I mean, he's the son of the commissioner of police, and he decides to take this chopper and goes and takes this guy out of prison just to free his sister because his father, who's a policeman, would not do that. I think somewhere the sheer audacity of that sequence where you wouldn't think it is possible suddenly makes you believe that Ravi could do the impossible. And I think it's a great insight into Jackie Shroff's character. Jackie Shroff plays Ravi in the film, and the second scene that you were talking about, where uh, a disgraced cop who's been sent to back up beyond, and even then, Bhujang's two sons, played by Tej Sapru and Dan Dhanova, are convinced that till the time they do not completely obliterate this threat to their father, he will come up someday. So they go to the village and they tie Sunny Deol up to a chair and they set his house on fire. And again, it's Ravi's character who just throws a pen knife well within Sunny Deol's reach so that Sunny could escape. But I think what takes the cake is the dialogue. As a child who saw this film, and when something when somebody used to do something really stupid, and I would come to know that, and I would make them my enemy for the rest of my life. I would say what Sunny Deol says in the film. So like Himanshu was saying that the house is burnt to a cinder. You're thinking the worst, you're thinking that this guy is dead, and suddenly he breaks the he pops up from the debris like a little like a jack in the
Yeah, yeah.
box. And he says this
Rising
fantastic dialogue.
Phoenix.
Yeah, I'm just paraphrasing here, but he says कि ये समाज और इंसानियत के दुश्मन आज से मेरे दुश्मन हैं. So anybody who would cross his path with me, I would say the same thing to them, that ये समाज और इंसानियत के दुश्मन आज से मेरे दुश्मन हैं.
That line did pick up. I mean, that line was quite popular. I remember. Yeah, I was very young back then, but I remember I couldn't even remember the dialogues. But I remember that scene had me in an entrance.
I think that death scenes, like I remember when I was writing my book on Rajesh Khanna, I came across a couple of instances where people told me that Rajesh Khanna started believing that if he died on screen, the film would become a super hit. So he would make sure that his writers and his directors would write a death scene into the screenplay. In fact, so much so that when Rishikesh Mukherjee was planning Namak Haram, he had originally offered the role of the spoilt brat to Rajesh Khanna, and they were still thinking of anybody else to do the role of the union leader. But because the union leader was a more powerful role, Rajesh Khanna decided to do that. And once he decided to do that, the millionaire's son would not be the character who would die on screen. It would be this trade union leader who would die on screen. I think Sunny Deol never really got a great death scene in cinema, but this was as close to as he could have imagined getting. And I think that death gave him a new lease of life, where in a literal sense also, because he's a changed character after that. He becomes a taxi driver to keep an eye, and basically he does not have the shackles of the law holding him back anymore. So what Bhujang's sons try to do, they end up doing the polar opposite of that.
Hey, Gautam, did Sunny Deol die in Dakat?
I think he dies in Dakat, if I'm not
Right,
towards
because
the.
and then it's shown that his son is they show his infant son, I think, in the last scene or something like that.
Probably. But I think
Yeah, but
that
like you
was.
said, he never received like a grand death sequence like like
Yeah, I
Bachchan
mean,
or Rajesh
unlike
Khanna.
say Anil Kapoor in Jambaz, or
Right.
Amitabh Bachchan in Diwar or Shakti, very few of the guys. I mean, even Amir Khan's first popular film, if you see Qayamat Se Qayamat, they gave him a brilliant death scene. And I don't think that anybody else came close. And even Anil Kapoor, had a lot of glorious on-screen deaths. Jackie Shroff had a couple of memorable on-screen deaths. In fact, one of his films which became a surprise hit, Teri Meherbaniya, it's the lab, his faithful dog who goes and avenges his death. So I think somewhere this was perhaps the best of both worlds. You die on screen, but you also get a second lease of life.
Right, works out. Now, we got to talk about the scintillating soundtrack of Tridev. Tridev was the first full soundtrack by Viju Shah. I think he had done the background for Yalgar before this. I'm not sure, but I think I read somewhere that he had done the background for Yalgar, for Feroz Khan's Yalgar. And the
No, I
credits
think
for.
it's wrong because Yalgar is 92. So he would see, I think probably
Oh, okay.
he.
I'm sorry. Okay, so that was after this. Yes.
No, but I think you're right because, somewhere even though Kalyanji Anandji, Vijusha is of course Kalyanji's son, and he's one of the best keyboard players that we had, and most of the one of the most iconic soundtracks of the 80s, Kayamat Se Kayamat Tak, he plays the keyboard on the soundtrack. But Himanshu, I think you have it right, because Jabaz, even though it is credited to Kalyanji Anandji,
Yes, yes. I think I
background
misspoke. I meant
score is
Jabaz. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. Yes, yes. Jabaz music obviously is Kalyan Jananji, but I think the background was done by Viju Shah.
And I think a lot of the songs also were arranged by
Oh, yeah, you think so?
Vijay, because I think Kalyanji Anandji were really, very old by the time, and I think the kind of sound that
Right. It does sound like
Firoz
Viju Shah.
Khan was looking for was something that Viju Shah could have come up with. I remember somewhere, back then, I think Jahbaz's soundtrack was Polydor, but this was the phase where T Series was doing a lot of uh, uh, combination of these films, and I remember seeing an audio cassette of Jahbaz where Viju Shah is credited with the sequencing or something on the soundtrack. So it
Programming or
tries to
something.
suggest that he played a greater role than just the keyboards. But yes, officially Tridev is his first credited score and first major success.
Yes, yes. Because I remember for Tridev, I just watched it recently again, and the credits explicitly say that the music is composed by Kalyan Anandji, but the music is conducted by Viju Shah. But I think
Mhm.
Viju Shah has mentioned in more than one occasion that he had indeed done the compositions too. And due to some, I think, contractual obligations between Rajiv Rai and Kalyan Anandji, they could not mention it, him as a composer in the credits. I remember reading that somewhere. But just for those who aren't familiar with Viju Shah, just a quick intro. Viju Shah is the son of the legendary Hindi composer Kalyanji Shah of Kalyanji Anandji duo. Kalyanji Anandji, of course, need no introduction. But in case you're new to Viju Shah, or if you haven't heard that much about Viju Shah, you definitely should. Viju Shah was an early experimenter with synths, electronic sounds, influenced by musical acts like Tangerine Dream, Enigma, Michel Jarre, Robert Miles, and that kind of a sound. And for Tridev, which is one of his most memorable soundtracks, Viju Shah came up with a very peppy, high energy, synth infused sound, heavily inspired in some parts and quite original in some. The most popular song from the movie is, of course, Oe Oe, which probably everybody knows, even the younger generation, which was a direct lift from Gloria Estefan's Rhythm's Gonna Get You. And there was also the title track of Tridev, which is also quite iconic. That too was a lift from Pet Shop Boys' One More Chance. But my favorite tracks from that particular album are not these songs, but the two romantic tracks, Main Teri Mohabbat Mein and my absolutely favorite, Gali Gali Mein. Especially Gali Gali Mein. I love that song to no end. I mean, I can talk about that song for an entire episode. But I'll just say this, and then I would love to hear what Gautam has to say about this. This is just a goddamn classic. I mean, right from those very, 70s De Palma-esque superimposes of Jackie Shroff and Sangeeta Bijlani at the very beginning, to the giant golden cage as the metaphor, to Jackie Shroff's wrapped around dupatta as a style statement, and of course the song itself. I love this song. I absolutely love this song. I would love to hear what you think about this song, Gautam.
I think the kind of sound that this song had was very, very unique, very, very Vijusha-esque, because songs are often identified by the composers or by the singers. And if you look at the songs which became popular, Tirchi Topi Wale, like you were mentioning, was a lift of Gloria Estefan's Rhythm's Gonna Get You, but it was again sung by Amit Kumar and Sapna Mukherjee, and Sapna had already become very popular after Jabaz's Pyar Lo Pyar Do, and Amit Kumar was one of the big singers and popular singers of the era. And the other romantic track, Main Teri Mohabbat Mein, which I think is very reminiscent of Tangerine Dream's Underwater,
Yes, yes.
uh, Underwater Dream or Underwater something.
Underwater Sunlight, I think.
Underwater Sunlight, right? But that again, that song is sung by Muhammad Aziz, who was one of the more popular singers of that period. Gali Gali Mein Firta Hai, because of the kind of, it's a duet. It's romantic duet, but it's probably romantic as an Anurag Kashyap would describe romance. It's not a traditional romance. It's a song where both the characters are trying to, you know, talk about themselves, but also the situation that they're stuck in. Unfortunately, in life, I think the choice of Manohar Das singing that kind of song for Jackie Shroff in a film like Tridev somewhere really takes it to a whole different level. And like you were mentioning, the manner in which the song is shot, uh, these dissolves and these long superimposes, where I feel that, perhaps Rajiv Rai being the kind of person that he was, there could have been an influence of Brian De Palma or even Hitchcock. Hitchcock's Vertigo has these classic, very, very long dissolves. But I also feel that somewhere this could be sheer laziness. This is a character who's technically the third lead, the third male lead in the film, and the third female lead in the film. And Ravi, played by Jackie Shroff, uh, does not have the best. I mean, his love story is not as important. And Sangeeta Bijlani's character, Natasha, who's trying to avenge her brother, their romance is not that important. And Natasha's mission is important. Ravi's relationship with his sister is important because the sister, played by Madhuri Dixit, is the only person who believes in the inherent goodness that Ravi's character has. Ravi's relationship with his brother-in-law, Sunny Deol's character, is also very important. And of course, his desire to be the bad guy makes him almost like the third son of Bhujang. So after Tehet Sapur and Dan Dhanova, there's Jackie is almost like a son to Bhujang, and that's why the shock and the letdown of him actually being a part of the Trinity, the Tridev, really lets Bhujang down. But I think this song somewhere, for the first time, gives you an indication that Ravi may not have gone over to the dark side. Ravi prison breaks a dreaded criminal to save his sister because his father will not take law in his own hands. He goes to kill his brother-in-law, but gives him, that little ray of hope, that little twig to hold on to by throwing a knife to free himself of the ropes that have been used to tie him
Right.
up. Somewhere this song, is a mix of being a love song, is a mix of being a revelation of sorts, and it is also somewhere trying to tell you that do not expect the usual from both the characters as well as the filmmaker. See, this is Rajiv Rai's second film. His first film, Yudh, was very was a very high profile film, even though it didn't do that well. Rajiv Rai is, of course, Gulshan Rai's son. Gulshan Rai is one of the biggest producers of Hindi cinema. Gulshan Rai produced Johnny Mera Naam. He produced Diwar. Uh, he Rajiv assisted Yash Chopra on a lot of films. But somewhere, because Yudh did not work, he really had to go back to the drawing board. So he tries to bring in elements which he likes and puts them in this realm of popular Hindi films. In that, I think there are a lot of spaces and instances in Tridev which give you an idea that it's not like a regular run of the mill Hindi film, but it's this song which kind of gives you both visual as well as an oral indication to what Rajiv Rai is all about. And I think that is why the song has survived the test of time. You may not you may probably laugh uh, hearing Oye Oye Gajar ne kiya hai ishara in this day and age. Even Tirchi Topi Wale, just for the sake of nostalgia, you may like. Otherwise, you let it pass. You may enjoy Mohammad Aziz's मैं तेरी मोहब्बत में पागल हो जाऊंगा because of the classic 1980s Hindi film, full feeling wala gana.
Romantic,
But
yeah, song, yeah.
yeah, but Gali Gali mein Phirta Hai somewhere, I think
It has
the
aged well.
words,
Yeah.
yeah, the words that Anand Bakshi uses, I mean, he's using मैं तेरी मोहब्बत में पागल ना हो जाऊं. He's using words like गजर ने किया है ये इशारा, where you a lot of people would have never known that gajar actually means, the clock. But here he takes these very simple words and tries to, knit them together that give you an insight. I think Anand Bakshi is one of those very few rare Hindi film lyricists who uses words very well to convey what the characters want to convey to each other, and they're oblivious of the audience, of course. The example that I can give you is Dil Wale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge is Mehndi Laga Ke Rakhna, where both Kajol and Shah Rukh Khan's characters know what they're up to, and even the audience knows, but none of the other characters know, you know. So the kind of lines that they use, बस और कुछ ना कहना, बस और कुछ ना करना, दिल की बात दिल में दबा के रखना, somewhere I think Bakshi Saab would excels at these kind of situational songs, and I think Gali Gali Mein Phirta Hai gives him an array of situations to play around with.
Yes, yes. The wordplay is fabulous. The visuals are fabulous. Like you said, it's also a style statement by Rajiv Rai. And yeah, I completely agree with you. I think this is the song that I love the most from the soundtrack. And this has also kind of, stood up well against time. Because even today, my favorite song from the soundtrack, like I said, is this. But even the video, I mean, as, over the top as it may seem, it's if you start the song, you're gonna listen it completely, till the end. It does have this kind of a seductive quality to it. And Sangeeta Bijlani and Jackie Shroff, and what a smashing pair they made on screen. I think they only did two other films, right? Lakshman Rekha, and there was one another film I forget. I think Izzat or Izzatar or something. I think they only made a
Izzat,
couple of films.
yeah. So Izzat was made by Salim, and I quite like the film, because again, it was one of those gritty 90s film.
Yes,
I
yes, it
remember
was a
the
good film.
title track where I think that's the thing that stuck out when I first saw Izzat was a guy like Goga Kapoor playing a good character, so he plays the honest, upright cop. So that stood out in my mind. And of course, the other film that you mentioned that Sangeeta and Jackie Shroff did was I think the only film that Sunil Sikand, who's Pran
Yes,
Sahab's son, directed the film. I
right.
think he had something there, but the market constraints could be a killer in that day and age. And unless you were really, really going to take the market on, like, I remember speaking to Mansoor Khan while I was working on my book on Qayamat Se Qayamat Tak, and they wrote a sad ending. They shot the sad ending, but by the time they got to shooting the ending of the film, Nasir Hussain Saab started just feeling a little jittery, and he said that just shoot a happy ending also for safety's sake. And when they first showed the film to distributors, and this was a time where a distributor could make or break careers of people, and the three things that the distributors did not like about the film, namely the music, the ending, and the title, were exactly the three things that forever endeared audiences to the film. And it was, in fact, it was Mansoor Khan who actually stuck to his gun and told his father that if you want to change the ending, take my name off the film. Otherwise, I will not, be a part of it. I think somewhere Sunil Sikand could not do that, and even Rajiv Rai, while making Yudh, could not do that. So it's unfortunate that these guys who could have done something interesting within the setup were never really given a chance because of market constraints.
Right, right, right. The external factors kind of curb their creativity and what they had in mind originally. Yeah, it's interesting what you mentioned about Mansoor Khan. I'm so glad that he stood his ground, and I mean, just imagine Qayamat se Qayamat tak with an happy ending. I mean, it completely changes how you look at the film.
True, true. I think somewhere uh, endings, people or at least the distributors looked at popular Hindi films as escapist drama, and they wanted to give people entertainment, and there was a misconception. Of, I wouldn't say misconception per se, but I would say that the kind of reality that we were looking at, in the 80s, somewhere we wanted an escape of sorts, and I think happy endings, uh, for the want of any other word, translated into that kind of escapism. And I think people really wanted films to have more than a justifiable ending or a logical ending. They wanted a happy ending.
Right, right. And it's kind of tricky, right? Because as you said, like for example, the example you cited with Rajesh Khanna and or even with Bachchan, I mean, whenever Bachchan used to, die in a film, the films did just fine. I mean, and same thing with Rajesh Khanna too. But it doesn't work for everybody, or it doesn't work for all the films. So I guess you never know when it's going to work and when it's not going to work.
True, and I think also, somewhere films were seen as entertainment, and an entertainment you really don't want to give out, you don't want to layer it with messages. You do not want people to, like today we are sitting here 30 years later talking about Tridev and trying to read between lines. And when Kayamat Se Kayamat Tak finished 25 years, I wrote a book on that. And then so many of these things were just happy accidents.
Absolutely. Yes, yes.
It's funny because when I go and meet filmmakers today and I try and take them down memory lane, many of them look at me with such shock and surprise. Sometimes even perhaps people like
It
me.
was just a job they were doing. Yeah.
Exactly. And here we are trying to think, oh my God, what was the meaning of that? What was the meaning of that dissolve? That is, someone asked Kurosawa a very, very interesting question. I think someone saw the first cut of Ran and said that, Maestro, why did you not pan a little more? Because, the look space of the character while you were panning is not justified. He said, had I panned even a degree more or an inch more, you would have seen Tokyo International Airport. So somewhere I think many of these, these artistic revelations are in fact accidents.
Yes, yes. As a legendary filmmaker once said, most masterpieces are accidents, and
True.
you tend to read into them after years, like you said. Just a parting note on Viju Shah. For those of you who are new to Viju Shah or would like to discover more of his music, some of his famous soundtracks are Gupt, Mora. I can think of Tere Mere Sapne. But one of my absolute favorite Viju Shah soundtracks came for a movie which came and sank without a trace. It was an adaptation of Sucker Punch, a novel by James Hadley Chase. And the name of the movie was Arya Par. It was a Ketan Mehta film, again with Jackie Shroff and Deepa Sai. And it's a lovely soundtrack. So if you haven't heard it, do check it out. And especially if you're new to Viju Shah. Viju Shah always had this, experimental strain to his music, which I really liked. And this was much before Rahman and Bappi Lahiri and R.D. Burman obviously did experiment a lot too, and many other film composers before them have also experimented. But Viju Shah's experimentation was more on the acoustic side, I think. It was more with the sound and it was more with the soundscapes that he was trying to, play around with. So do check out Arya Par soundtrack if you like Viju Shah or if you want to discover some new music. Have you seen this film, Gautam? Arya Par? I'm sure you.
Yes, I was a big Jackie Shroff fan, and
Oh, were
anything
you?
that
Okay.
Jackie did, I would watch. I mean, I saw films like we were just discussing Izzat, and I still remember the songs. I saw a film called Doodh Ka Karz, where
Yes.
Jackie Shroff has a snake
Ashwini
for a
Pawan and
half
Jackie
brother.
Shroff. Yeah.
So I was a huge fan, and I think the film. I think the film came slightly before its time, where people were not ready to have that kind of layering as far as
Hmm.
your characters went.
Yeah, so many of these films now, I think, like, especially like films like Arya Par or some of the other films, they would even make like great mini series on Netflix or Amazon. I mean, like you said, it was ahead of its time, and perhaps not as a motion picture, but perhaps as a small kind of a mini series.
True, because a lot of these films had characters or nuances which could not have been given the kind of time or the kind of the kind of importance as far as the screenplay went in the realm of Hindi films. So Hindi filmों में there's a word called ठहराव. It's very important to have the right kind of stay, because something which is slightly longer can, for the want of any other word, make it, push it into the whole art film league where the audience may not be that benevolent to give you that kind of that benevolent to indulge you. And at the same time, anything quicker or faster will not allow the character to completely grow. Unfortunately, the kind of characters that populate a film like Arya Par are the kind of characters you really need some time to understand and some time to grow. I think the other film in the recent past that I can think of, which falls in the same category and perhaps would make for a very good TV series, was Sudhir Mishra's Ye Sali Zindagi. Uh, ye,
Nice film.
the
Yes.
the narrative had many interesting characters, and I think Sudhir did try to give as much as screen time as uh, he possibly could. But I think certain characters in the film and then the quirks that they have would make for a very insightful TV series, much like Aryapar.
And since you said you're a big fan of Jackie Shroff, I'm going to put you on a spot for a minute and ask you for favorite Jackie Shroff performance and favorite Jackie Shroff film. They could be different.
So I would probably rate Parinda as Jackie Shroff's greatest performance. I think the spotlight was never on him, both in the film and beyond the capacity of the film. This was a period where Anil Kapoor was probably poised to become the next superstar after Mr. Bachchan, and Jackie was a rank outsider. Jackie was, derided for his bad acting. I mean, even in films like Kash, where he plays a very sensitive character, or Yudh, where he manages to give you that kind of balance to Anil Kapoor. Anil Kapoor, of course, is a far more accomplished actor and has fantastic screen presence and dedication to the characters that he plays. But I think, given the limitations, for the want of any other word, that Jackie Shroff inherently had, he's charted a fantastic career. I think Parinda, Kash would be two films that would really take the cake as far as Jackie Shroff performances are concerned. But I would still rate Tridev up there because of the sheer, the sheer the sheer memory that the character leaves you with. The kind of dupatta wearing rebel without a cause that Jackie becomes in the film, and it's inspired a whole fashion statement amongst the young people of back in the day, where they would raid their mothers or their sisters' cupboards to take that bandhani dupatta and just wrap around themselves their necks, thinking that they were Jackie Shroffs. So Tom Cruise's aviator sunglasses and Jackie Shroff's leather jacket with this dupatta became a style statement for a lot of people in the 80s. And I remember few of my classmates, who had elder siblings, and the age difference was considerable. And they were in college while we were still in school, and they would take us out for a bike ride or something. And none of them would, you could not see a single guy in his late teens or early 20s who could drive or who could ride a bike who would not have a dupatta around his neck. I mean, it became such a big statement. And I think somewhere it was a very emancipating thing also. I mean, Jackie could take anything and just make it look good. And he was also one of the first superstars or film stars whose posters guys would put up, because he would have this strange quirk of dressing up. He could wear a dhoti for a formal function while everybody else would be dressed in their best western dinner jackets or what have you. He could wear a Gandhi topi and make it look, really in fashion. And I think he was one of the first guys who openly credited their designers. Anna Singh used to design for Jackie Shroff, and in film magazines you would have Jackie's posters, and you would have the photo credit given to somebody like probably a Gautam Rajadiksha, the makeup credit given to Mickey Contractor, but or Deepak Samant also, who was very regular with Jackie Shroff. But Anna Singh would invariably be the designer, and that also was a very nice thing for young men to see at that time, because you would see film credits and you would often see people like Akbar Gabana being credited as the costume designer for Amitabh Bachchan or Vinod Khanna, and to see Anna Singh, a woman's name there, designing costumes for Jackie, who was a man's man back then, as far as his screen image went. That was a very, very liberating and emancipating thing. I mean, I won't say it had a direct impact, but somewhere it left a subtle message that, look beyond the obvious.
Speaking of Jackie Shroff's dupatta style, every time I see Lallan Top and I see Saurav Dwivedi, sporting that kind of a dupatta around his neck, I always
Yeah,
wondered if this guy is also a fan of Jackie Shroff. I wonder if he got it from him, or he could have got it from somewhere else, but he might as well got it from Tridev.
probably now that you mentioned, the next time I meet Saurabh, I'll probably, ask him the question.
do,
And
do ask him, yes.
yeah, yeah, and I'll have a drink if he says that it was Jackie, and I'll raise my glass to you that day.
That sounds good, Gautam. Well, Tridev is a special film, and personally, Tridev is such a throwback to childhood that I get nostalgic about it quite often. And that's why I decided to do this small celebration on the occasion of 30th anniversary of the film for this episode. And thanks so much, Gautam, for joining in and sharing with us your wonderful insights on the film. I think you love the film just as much, and it was great talking with you, and this was fun.
It was my pleasure, Himanshu, and thanks for rekindling Tridev. A lot of young guys out there, unfortunately, would have no experience of this film, but I think uh, it's as good as any day to watch Tridev, and I hope that uh, after hearing this podcast, a lot of people go and check out Tridev. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Gautam. Thank you so much. Like I said towards the end of our chat, I enjoyed doing this episode on Tridev, as Tridev is such a nostalgic trip for me. If you too are a fan, I hope you enjoyed listening as well. If you haven't watched the film, here's hoping that you will give it a go sometime soon. Check it out. I think you'll like it. At the very minimum, I would recommend checking out the song Gali Gali Mein. It's a terrific song. That's our episode. You can follow me on Twitter at loveofcinemasf8 for podcast-related updates and my tweets on all things movies. That's Love of Cinema SF8. See you next week. This is Himanshu, and like always, thank you for listening to the Love of Cinema podcast.